Hello. The DVD that you just watched was me a few years ago. However, the information in it is just as valid today as it was back when I filmed it in 1998. Now, a few things have changed in the hiring process, which we'll go over. In fact, a few things have changed in my life, and I'd like to talk about both. Now, after filming Becoming a Cop, I stayed with Costa Mesa for a couple more years. However, I resigned because I started my own company that trained military, law enforcement, probation, and corrections personnel. In fact, I got the blessings of my chief, Dave Snowden. You might remember him because he gave a speech at the beginning of the DVD. In fact, I've stayed in contact with my former chief, and he's doing quite well. He is now the chief of police of Beverly Hills in Southern California, and of course, a city that's known worldwide. And like everybody else, he had to, when he applied for that position, had to have an interview and obviously a background check, and of course he had no problem being the chief of police at Costa Mesa. 2 days after I left Costa Mesa Police Department, I walked over to the Orange County Sheriff's Department, Reserve Division, and applied as a Reserve Deputy Sheriff. And of course, I wanted to keep my hand in law enforcement because I already had 10 years of experience, and yet I still had my company, so I wanted both. I wanted the best of both worlds. And just exactly like the DVD that I made, I had to follow the same process. I had to go through a written test. I had to go to a physical agility test. I had to go through the medical, psychological. I had to sit before an oral board in front of 3 lieutenants. And there was no difference. Just because I had previous law enforcement experience, I had to go through the whole process again. Why? Because like any job, you have to sell yourself. Now the great thing was, even though it took several months like any other, you would think that going from one department to another would be a fast process, but many times it's not, and it took several months. However, it was worth it because I ended up in the search and rescue unit, but right away the sergeant found out that I had some counterterrorism training, and I had worked with many units across the world by this time with my organization. And I was eventually promoted to sergeant and put in charge as a team leader of a dignitary protection unit. It was great because we ended up protecting diplomats that were coming from Washington, D.C. or Sacramento, movie stars, very important persons, and of course I was in charge of a 10-man team. And in addition to that, I was a patrol supervisor, and I had a squad of 5 men under me for a uniform patrol in the Reserve Division. And the great thing was I was what we call in California a level 1 designate reserve officer or peace officer. And basically full police powers, a police officer, peace officer for 24/7. But part-time, and that was the beauty of the job, and I enjoyed it immensely for 2 years. It was during my 2 years at the Sheriff's Department that my training company flourished. Not only did I train personnel from my own department, but I was also training police and military units worldwide. I trained the United States Air Force security forces in aircraft interdiction tactics and other special operations functions on various bases throughout the United States. I've been down in South America, training Argentinian SWAT teams in advanced firearm tactics, police tactics, and sniper tactics, and then next door in Brazil, training dozens of units and finding out that law enforcement brotherhood is not just a local phenomena, but an international one. I've trained with the United States Navy and the U.S. Coast Guard in maritime interdiction, having the chance to do seawall and hull searches, as well as casting off from high-speed boats into the water. I've trained extensively with the United States Marines and was a certified range safety officer at Camp Pendleton, located in Southern California. I've also done a lot of special forces training with the U.S. Army, Marines, and Navy in military operations urban terrain, or MOUT training as they call it, and have had an exciting time doing things like rappelling down out of a tower under the watchful eye of experienced SF instructors. My career has given me the opportunity to do air assault operations and jump out of helicopters, fly as a pilot with United States Air Force Auxiliary out of El Toro Marine Air Station, which was always a rush operating near F-18 fighter jets. Over the past few years, I've taught at many correctional facilities, giving courses in prisoner transportation, defensive tactics, and cell extractions. When it comes to counterterrorism training, I've learned from the best. I've trained a few times with the GSG-9, Grenzschutzgruppe 9, Germany's top counterterrorist unit, as well as with the Israelis in their own backyard. In fact, it was there that I learned all about suicide bombers, terrorist takedowns, and other high-risk situations. Then 9/11 hit, the shocking terrorist attacks on the United States. Of course, I couldn't sit still, and I wanted to be in the middle of the action in the war on terrorism. Because of my extensive special operations background, I was selected by the United States government to be a federal air marshal, or FAM as we called it. However, you don't just waltz right in and get that job. I had to start all over, going through the hiring process once again, application, interviews, medical, and a background that was even more detailed than my last two. Needless to say, because I had trained with different foreign governments, different military and police units, my own government wanted to know everything about the trips that I took outside of this country. They wanted to see my passport and verify dates. They wanted to know how long I was gone for. They wanted to know how many days. They wanted to know who my contacts were. They wanted to know what exactly did I teach. And of course, this was for national security. This was a top secret clearance I was going for, and those kind of questions had to be done. And I went through several interviews to just make sure, and of course, cross-interviewed by different examiners, so they can compare notes. Well, I ended up getting the job and became a special agent. I received my basic training at FLETC, the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center, and went on to counterterrorist school. The training was excellent. Learning about various terrorist groups, how to do surveillance on targets, advanced shooting courses, bomb searches, and of course, aviation security. I did 146 counter-terrorist missions with the federal government, then resigned once the United States was free and clear of any major threat. I went on to training more police agencies and military units, and was even hired several times by the United States government. I've trained all over the United States, Europe, and again in Israel. I also became a reserve sergeant a second time. I've put my past training to good use and currently write a monthly column for Black Belt magazine called High Risk. It is the world's largest martial arts magazine, and in it I tackle self-defense issues from a law enforcement and military perspective. I also have over 20 DVDs out on the market worldwide teaching people genuine self-defense, which I call reality-based personal protection. I've had quite an exciting life, and of course many people poke fun at me saying that my story, my experiences, and my jobs is more like a James Bond story than a real life story. And of course you can check out that on my website, www.jimwagnertraining.com. I give a lot of credit to my life because of law enforcement, and I've loved the career and I love being in it. Now, you may not have all the advantages that I had. You may not jump out of helicopters or assault a gas and oil platform or go to sniper school. But any job you take in law enforcement is exciting, and it is a tremendous service to society. So what we're going to cover in this next part of this DVD, to finish it off so you know how to get that job, is a few more pointers that you should know about. So let's take a look at them. For many departments, the written test is nothing more than a spelling test. Apparently, a lot of people coming out of college or high school have no idea how to spell, how to write, and of course what this is going to do is create a lot of confusion and frustrations for a department if that officer cannot write a decent police report. So you better start practicing some of the major words in law enforcement as far as spelling goes. Now, many times a department or agency will have you write a paragraph. They'll have you describe various things. Maybe it's a stressful event you experienced and how you dealt with it. Or they just might ask you to write about your work history, and usually these assignments are about 2 pages, takes about anywhere from 15 to 20 minutes, but they just want to basically see if you know how to write a decent paragraph, if you know how to write a decent report, because if you don't know how to write and it's all sloppy, you're not going to go very far. In the previous part of the DVD, I explained that you obviously need a high school diploma or GED. This is the minimum requirement. However, I cannot overemphasize how important it is nowadays to get an AA degree or at least a bachelor's degree. And of course, when you're going through school, you better try to keep your grade point average as high as possible because believe it or not, they look at that. And especially if you're just entering law enforcement for the first time, they're going to look and see what kind of student you were. Not a whole lot has changed with the physical agility test. In fact, what I gave earlier is probably your standard. However, you got to remember every agency is different. I've been to some that are killers. Where they even added on like a 1.5 mile run after everything else. And then I've been to some that were a joke, no challenge at all. And of course it's going to depend on which agency, and you're going to want to find out what they require of you. Now, one thing I didn't stress in the last one, or the last part of this DVD, was you should also have a light workout with weights. Not so much to bulk up, but just to keep firm and keep the upper body strength, get the legs strong. I highly recommend that. Now, one of the things that you're going to need is, of course, like I mentioned, is a good credit history. If you don't have good credit, you're not going to probably get the job. And what you can do is get a copy of your credit report. Get it now, see what it's on there. Even on my own credit report, I found out that somebody had used my wife's social security number and was charging stuff on our account. And of course, that was on there. And I knew about the crime, I just had no idea that it was still there. So you want a copy of your credit report, and you want to clean that up if there's anything questionable on it. The reason why they want to know if you have good credit or if you're good with your finances is, let's say you get into a federal job, federal law enforcement, they're going to hand you, in some of these positions, a credit card. And before they do that, they want to make sure you know what you're doing. When I was a federal air marshal, I charged everything on my credit card, meals, hotels, transportation. And of course, you know, it's not something you want to abuse because you'll get in trouble with your agency. There are many agencies that still use the paper fingerprint cards. However, since I made this DVD first in 1998, technology has changed. Many states, like California, will have you do what they call a live scan. And what it is it replaces the paper cards, and it's nothing more than a computer with a small glass plate where they roll your fingers onto the glass plate. And of course, electronically, digitally, it is recorded on the computer, and then it's sent to the proper authorities where they see if you have any arrest and convictions. Now, one of the things that I failed to do early on in my career was start writing down names of people you work with. These might be your future references, and I've had backgrounds where they're contacting people I knew 15 years ago. And of course, some jobs, when I was in, just prior to getting into law enforcement, I was in advertising, I couldn't remember everybody. So you want to get addresses, phone numbers of people you work with, and obviously people who are favorable to you. If you've traveled abroad, make a list of dates, places you visited, and the reason why. Now, this is more specifically for jobs that require a security clearance, such as with the federal government, or maybe a corporation that deals with the State Department. You shouldn't just apply with 1 or 2 agencies. If you do that, you're asking for trouble. I recommend no less than about 8 to 10 agencies and apply all at once. Or spread them out over the weeks, because what's going to happen is any one of these can take from 6 months to a year to get through. And if you only applied to 1 or 2 and those 2 don't come through, you're looking at another half year to year ahead. So if you got 10 in the row and you think you have a good shot at law enforcement, you know, you want to have individual folders for each one of these to keep track of all the dates, your exams, and then of course if they call you up and ask a question, you immediately can pull your file and check it out. For those of you who are obligated to pay child support, you had better be complying with the terms established by the court. There's documents you have to sign going into law enforcement, and if you're a deadbeat dad or a mom, you're going to get in trouble and you're not going to get the job. One of the things that have changed since 1998 is domestic violence. And you cannot be a law enforcement officer in this day and age with any agency if you have even a misdemeanor domestic violence arrest and conviction against you. So if you have that, you're probably out of the game. As mentioned earlier, you're going to have to undergo a medical examination, and these are pretty thorough. You have to be at least proportionate height and weight wise, but also body fat for a lot of departments is a very important criteria, and they will measure it. For females, you should have a maximum body fat of 30%, and for males, 22%. And you might want to go to your own doctor and ask them about checking your body fat prior to maybe taking a medical exam, because if you don't meet the requirements, oftentimes you'll fail. Now, if you're over 40, you most likely will have to be taking a cardiac stress test, the CST, and you better be in shape for it. What they do is they put you on a treadmill and they put you at an incline, and if you're not used to that incline, it's a killer. And they start off slow with wide strides. Then they build up the speed a little bit more, like you're hoofing it uphill. And then finally, you're in a full jog. And if you can endure maybe 4 minutes of each step until you've completed about 12 minutes, and if you're running hard, you get the heartbeat to maximum rate, you'll pass it. Hopefully if there's nothing wrong with your heart. But you need to be in shape for it, because it can catch you by surprise if you haven't done the treadmill. You will be tested for drugs in your system, whether through a drug test taking blood from you or a urine test. And of course you shouldn't be taking drugs anyway. And now obviously if you're taking prescription drugs, you know, these are things you have to let them know about so they can give you some advice. One of the tests that I failed to mention last time, and it reminded me when I had to take a couple of them, is a color deficiency test for your vision. And what they do is they show you some cards that have colored numbers within a colored area, and you have to distinguish between the colors. People who have color deficiency will not be able to distinguish the numbers, and it will look like just one big circle to them, or a square, whatever the test is. So this is something your eye doctor can help you with to find out if you do have a color deficiency, because that can keep you from going into law enforcement. That concludes the new material on this DVD. It's enough to get you the job if you are qualified. And like I mentioned before, law enforcement is a great career. It's been a great career for me. Just go after your dreams, give it your best shot, and hopefully you will land that job. And if you do, just enjoy it and savor it, because nothing lasts forever, but it could be a career that is very satisfying. And in the end, when you finally retire, you'll have a lot of great memories to look back on, and you'll have a lot of good friends.